Half-Life 2, Epistle 3. Just saying it out loud kind of hurts. Episode 2 ended with the biggest cliffhanger in the entire series. Eli Vance was dead, the Combine knew everything of our plan to take back Earth, they knew all the specifics of our teleportation technology, Mossman was presumed captured, Breen was still alive in some form, the Resistance was caught in a hot debate as to whether we should destroy the Borealis or use it against the Combine, G-Man's intentions were finally coming into focus. We hadn't yet gotten a complete story. We never got to see how these events were going to play out. Valve never got a chance to one-up the mind-bending reveal of Zen that they pulled off in Half-Life 1. We never got to see the world of Portal and the world of Half-Life truly come together. All because, for whatever reason, Valve never shipped the final episode of Half-Life 2. Then, nearly a decade later, Mark Laidlaw, the lead writer for the entire Half-Life series, released a little document on his personal website. Epistle 3. It was an entire plotline for the never-released Episode 3, thinly veiled as an unrelated story, changing the names of characters around and flipping their genders. It's a really interesting story, and as far as I'm concerned, a fitting end to Half-Life 2. So rather than provide a boring old lore recap like anyone could, today I'd like to give my own little literary analysis of Episode 3. Let's talk about what, artistically, this story and its execution says to me. In this instance, though, a little disclaimer is necessary. Video game writing, especially in the hands of perfectionists like Valve, is a very fluid thing. Plots of Valve games, especially the Half-Life series, can change a lot over the course of development. Certain gameplay requirements might completely shake up plot points. Playtesters might not be connecting with character arcs the way that Valve intended, so those character arcs are changed. In fact, I hear that the entire plot of Half-Life Alyx was changed in the last year of development, simply because people weren't connecting with the ending like Valve had hoped they would. So while I'll be analyzing Epistle 3 for what it is and not what it isn't, it's worth noting that none of this should be considered perfectly authoritative. Mark Laidlaw has said that the plot outlined in Epistle 3 would have been nothing but a starting point for Valve, and a few months ago, he even said that he regretted publishing Epistle 3 in an interview with Rock Paper Shotgun. He said that he was in a really bad place at the time, and that he would have caused a lot less headache for his old colleagues had he just kept the plot summary to himself. However, none of this means that Epistle 3 isn't valuable as a piece of art. In fact, its controversial nature and creation makes it a super fascinating piece for me to dig into. Lastly, I'll be depicting my own interpretation of some of these scenes in Gary's mod, made with the help of my friend Groovy Gray, but similarly, I'll be taking a lot of artistic license. Not only that, but some of these visuals will conflict with concept art, simply because the concept art conflicts with what's in Epistle 3. So, take the visuals in this video at face value. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about this thing. I think we should start out with a little plot summary. I hadn't read through this thing in years, and I'd already forgotten a good bit of it, and I'm assuming the same applies to a lot of you. Alex and Gordon head via helicopter to Mossman's coordinates to the Borealis in Antarctica. Shortly behind them, a rebel militia follows as backup. The helicopter crashes, and the two have to go on foot to meet up with Mossman. On their way through the Arctic, they stumble upon the Breen grub. At the end of Half-Life 2, Dr. Breen's consciousness was put into a host body.
A host body must be joking. I can't possibly...
There he is.
All right, damn it, that's what it takes. Just hurry, he's right behind me.
We even see that host body being created during Episode 1. That would be Breen Grub. He's injured and begs Gordon and Alex to put him out of his misery. Alex refuses, preferring to let Breen Grub suffer, and the text implies that you might have had the option to kill him yourself. Alex believed that a quick death was more than Wallace Breen deserved, but for my part, I felt a modicum of pity and compassion. Out of Alex's sight, I might have done something to hasten the slug's demise before he proceeded. Deeper into this Combine facility, Gordon and Alex would have come across a captured Judith Mossman. Alex blames her for Eli's death, but the two are dependent on each other, as Mossman has this so-called resonance keys that are necessary for bringing the Borealis to a specific location. As it turns out, the coordinates Dr. Mossman gave the two weren't for the location of the Borealis, but for a location that it was expected to appear at in the near future. See, the Borealis is unstable and teleports through time and space, practically at random. After fighting their way through some more Combine defenses, the trio reaches an outpost where Mossman is able to summon the Borealis and bring it completely into our dimension. They scramble aboard just in time to escape the Combine's advances, given that they were slowed down by the rebel militia. On board the Borealis, they saw themselves shifting between millions of worlds, not entirely in any single one of them, but not entirely out of any single one of them either. One of the worlds that the trio saw as they were shifting through time and space was what appeared to be a nexus in the Combine overworld, where they appeared to be staging invasions of planets like Earth. Alex hatched the scheme to set the Borealis to self-destruct and send it hurling towards the Combine nexus. Meanwhile, Mossman argued that they should send it back to the Resistance so that they could study it and harness its powers against the Combine. Alex was dead set on honoring her father's final wishes and destroying the Borealis, and it came down to Mossman trying to overpower Alex, only to be shot by her. Finally, there was nothing left to do but aim the Borealis into the heart of the Combine invasion nexus and take the suicide plunge to deliver one final, deadly blow to the Combine. In their final moments together, G-Man stole Alex away from Gordon, and Gordon was left to stare at the Combine's Dyson sphere and reflect on how this final, ultimate attack from humanity's most powerful weapon would hardly register as a blip on the Combine's sensors. It was absolutely nothing compared to the Combine's own vastness and power. For some context, a Dyson sphere is a classical sci-fi concept of a structure built to totally encapsulate a sun and harness all of its energy as it goes supernova and dies. It's commonly thought of as the last milestone in a civilization's technical advancements. Finally, when all hope was lost, the Vortigaunts abducted Gordon, just as G-Man did to Alex, and set him aside on some ancient and alien shore to live out the rest of his days in quiet solitude. The fate of humanity would be decided by those left on Earth. Gordon would never know what came of this fight for the survival of his species, and seemingly his only hope of ever seeing life again would be for the G-Man or the Vortigaunts to have further use of him on some other day. Wow, this is a dense story. There's a lot more going on here thematically than there is in any of the other Half-Life games, or rather, the themes of those other games have been pushed to their absolute limit here. See, the aspect about Half-Life's story that's always interested me the most was the G-Man, and all that he represents. I don't really care about debunking his true intentions or his role in the story. What captivates me instead is how truly unknowable those things are. Right there at the beginning, in the final moments of Half-Life 1 when we first meet him, we fight tooth and nail to save all of humanity, and ourselves, only to be pulled into a mundane train car and told by some weird alien space god that we did good and that his employers are satisfied with him as a result. We just killed the most philosophically shocking creature in existence, only to find out that this was all nothing but an insignificant blimp in the life of some cosmic middle manager named G-Man. Right off the bat, the game is challenging our own grandeur and pride in our accomplishments by showing us that there are so many forces at play that are so much larger than anything we can possibly comprehend. And everything we've done, our entire fight for survival, would be but a tiny, infinitesimally insignificant footnote in their world. The same thing happens at the end of Half-Life 2. We destroy the Citadel, this incredible structure, and give humanity a fighting chance at saving the world, only to see dozens of other Citadels through the other side of this tiny, tiny view into the Combine overworld. And G-Man simply comes up and says, "Cool, I'll wake you up when I need you again." Unfortunately for G-Man, the Vortigaunts bring you out of his stasis so that you can further in humanity's struggles, and so, at that first hint of rebellion on your part, G-Man sets you up to do one last bit of work for him, destroying the Borealis, and then just leaves you to die. He doesn't care in the slightest that you're attacking the Combine overworld. After all, you can see for yourself that your final assault on it won't achieve anything at all. He's just satisfied that the Borealis has been destroyed, and he leaves you to die, knowing that the Vortigaunts' affinity for you has made you a rogue element. Like I said, all through the Half-Life series, we've been shown over and over that, as epic and grand as our stories are, they hardly matter whatsoever to the powers that be. These final moments of Epistle 3, where we stare in the eye of our own insignificance, are a perfect example of that. Epistle 3 is a story about nihilism. Really, all of Half-Life is about nihilism. For God's sake, the final boss of the first game is called the Nihilanth. It's right there in the name. And now, here in Epistle 3, the seemingly all-powerful ruler of humanity begs for his death. Your increasingly unhinged friend, Alex, is shown to be more important, at least for the time being, than you are. Humanity's entire struggle for survival, a war that every member of the species is a part of, is ultimately portrayed as little more than pissing in the wind. All of those soldiers you killed, all of those potential scientific breakthroughs your species could have offered to the Combine, they've all been destroyed. And that's portrayed as nothing more than acceptable losses to the Combine. They simply don't care what happens to Earth. These guys that they sent to take over our planet, the billions killed in their wake, it was nothing more than one of 100,000 similar conflicts that they probably have going on other planets at that exact moment in time. It's absolutely nothing to them. A drop in the bucket. So, what's the point of anything in a world that, much like the fascism of the Combine on Earth, has proven that it's completely nihilistic to the individual? Why rebel? Why stand up to it if you won't make a difference? Well, even in this, the most nihilistic story in the world of nihilism that is Half-Life, we see the game singing the praises of humanity. We see the appeal of the individual and their emotions, which are so precious to our species, but which the Combine have almost zero practical use for. In my previous video, all about the character of Alex Vance, I talked about how she was where Half-Life 2 got its heart from. So what better subject to use in a talk about the appeal of the individual than Alex herself? See, all throughout this story we see examples of Alex's humanity through these seemingly illogical decisions she makes. Breen, for instance, is a pretty massive threat to humanity. He should most definitely be killed, whether it's out of pity or a pragmatic desire to eliminate a potential threat. Killing Breen here is the right decision. Alex doesn't, though. Her anger has her choosing to let him suffer rather than answer his prayers by giving him a quick and deserved death. Let's talk about why she does this. Like I talked about in my previous video, Alex is a person who responds heavily to trauma. She lost her mother when she was young, so she grew up extremely independent. She was stuck inside a stalker pod for God knows how long, so she had a panic attack when she sees a stalker up close, even though they're essentially the same thing as an Overwatch soldier. She's attacked by a hunter, so she completely freezes up the next time she encounters one. Meanwhile, she isn't all that afraid of antlions or headcrabs or zombies or even Combine advisors because she hasn't personally had any especially horrific experiences with them. In the beginning of Half-Life 2, Alex doesn't really act like she's got very strong feelings about Breen. Sure, he's one of the bad guys and she gets that, but she even says that her dad is the one between the two of them who's got the real problem with Breen.
Remember him from Black Mesa? Your old administrator. Don't get my dad started on Dr. Breen.
Well, ultimately, Dr. Breen personally gave Alex a traumatic experience when he taunted her about the death of her mother and tried to kill her father. I'll bet you right now that if he hadn't done those two very specific things, even with everything else he did, Alex would have opted to kill Breen here and put him out of his misery. Once again, we see this theme of humanity rising up from a cold, sterile world of nihilistic pragmatism. That's really how I see this whole series. It's just a bunch of humans doing anything they can to find meaning, reason, and purpose in a nihilistic world whose scope reaches so far as to reduce the entire species to nil. That ever so memed on boundless human spirit is what Half-Life is all about. Hell, why do you think my idea that Episode 1's design goal was to make an NPC as believable and human as possible fit in so well with the rest of Half-Life? Ultimately, that's the same stuff that this ending is made from. Alex finally meets G-Man face-to-face for the first time, and she learns the hard truth that Gordon supposedly learned a few weeks earlier at the ending of Half-Life 1. That, in the grand scheme of things, humanity is nothing, and Gordon's left with nothing but a shining bright emblem of the universe's nihilism. The bad guys won a long, long time ago, but humanity, by its very nature, will never give up. So this is where we can get into the meta side of things. See, the way that this whole thing is framed is very deliberate. Mark Laidlaw is a writer first and a video game writer second. Of course, if he finally gets to publish a Half-Life story in written form, he's going to weave some artistic flair into the text itself. I think it's so easy for us to get caught up on finally having some answers about how Half-Life 2 ended that we can easily forget that there's a lot more to any work of art than the surface-level story. So, right off the bat, the inherent joke that's weaved into Epistle 3 is just how verbose Gordon is. Obviously, Gordon Freeman never speaks in any official Half-Life works, but here in Epistle 3 he's going on and on about small details, using airy phrases like yours and infinite finality, describing nuanced accounts of his emotions and experiences. If you only read this, you'd think that Gordon was chattier than a Metal Gear character in the games. While I think that, above all else, this and the fact that all of the characters' names are changed is a bit of a joke about the farcical nature of a Half-Life story that's only halfway canon, and exists in this sort of unclear middle ground of officialness. I think there's a bit more to it than that, though. See, this stuff really hints again at the main motif of the Half-Life series, humanity rising from unexpected places. I always saw Gordon's personality as being nothing more than just a string of emojis. He puts on a little pouty face when things get sad, he shrugs when people talk to him, and he gets scared when headcrabs jump at him, but there's no real soul to a character who, by design, is an empty vessel for the player. Seeing so much personality come from the way that Gordon writes in Epistle 3 is a perfect reminder that humans, no matter how pragmatic they are, checking every corner for ammunition that they really don't need, are ultimately emotionally driven creatures. Reading Epistle 3 really makes you think, for maybe the first time, about the toll that the events of the Half-Life series would have taken on Gordon. I mean, from his perspective, it's been about 3 weeks since the Resonance Cascade, and he's been fighting, running, and facing ego death after ego death the entire time. We don't think about him that way because he wasn't designed to be that way, but Epistle 3 reminds us, like the rest of Half-Life, that humanity is completely inseparable from humans. Gordon's wordiness in Epistle 3, thematically, is no different than that one chair in Episode 2, hinting at a bored survivalist drinking beer and casually shooting at the zombies below. Now we've got to talk about the really weird thing in Epistle 3, the beach at the ending. As a reminder, Gordon is writing this letter to us describing the events of the Borealis mission from an eternal, nameless beach that he was placed on by a group of Vortigaunts moments before the Borealis crashed into the Combine invasion nexus. He's just stuck there, left with nothing but his thoughts and memories. He has no knowledge of if humanity ultimately won the war against the Combine. He has no knowledge of what planet he's on, or if he's back in Zen, or anything. He's just stranded on this beach. What the hell is that even about anyways? Obviously it fits in with Half-Life's themes of futility, but why does Gordon get such a cold ending? This feels so different from G-Man abducting him at the end of Half-Life 1. It's like the cosmos itself just chewed Gordon up and threw him away. So why? Well, to get into that, we've got to talk about where exactly Mark Laidlaw was mentally at the time of writing Epistle 3. As always, I'd like to specify that I do not know this man. I don't claim to know what was going on in his head. I can only speculate based on what I know about Valve's history and go off what he said in interviews. Ultimately, though, everything I say here will simply be a reflection of my own values and perspective, projected onto the concrete events that happened over the course of Half-Life 2 Episode 3's doomed development. So, first off, the sheer existence of Epistle 3 is inherently passive-aggressive. While I'm much younger and more impatient than Mark Laidlaw was at the time, I know that I would be very annoyed with my work at Valve had I been in his shoes. Think about it. You're working on this series from 1998 all the way up to 2007 and beyond, only to have your entire story end on a cliffhanger, and the conclusion is just never released. I think it's safe to say that Mark Laidlaw was very attached to the story of the Half-Life episodes. I mean, hell, for over a year he ran a Twitter account that showed Breen in his new advisor body slowly trying to communicate his experience as having his sentience replaced with the Combine's mental parasite. It's actually a really fantastic little story showing a first-hand account of how the Combine assimilated the advisor's race. But anyways, you're stuck working on Episode 3 only to have it thrown out and reworked over and over and over again before it can ever really even enter production. A completely unofficial Twitter ARG is the only thing you're able to publish for 6 years. Finally, a VR Half-Life project you've been working on, titled Borealis, gets cancelled, and so you retire from the company so that you can focus on reviving a long-dead career as a novelist. Personally, I would be incredibly disappointed and incredibly frustrated. Interestingly, Mark Laidlaw wound up retiring to an island in 2016, completely separated from Valve and Half-Life and all of his old writing friends who he'd been working with for 18 years. That's what Epistle 3 was born from, in my opinion. Had I experienced all that and then released Epistle 3, I would say that I felt like I had gone completely insane and that I just had to get some closure from the series that made my career. Personally, I would feel a little burned too. Again, I don't want to claim to know what Mark Laidlaw was thinking, but I would kind of feel like Valve was, well, G-Man, and that after years of fighting my ass off, serving his purposes, I wound up having exhausted my usefulness to him, and there was nothing left for him to do but move on without me. And if I then move to an island, isolated from my community, I might write something about Gordon being abducted by Vortigaunts and secreted onto an infinite cosmic beach with no knowledge of what happened to the Combine or the Resistance, or if he even had any impact for the rest of time. Again, I don't want to make it sound like I know anything about what Mark Laidlaw was thinking when he published Epistle 3. I don't want to imply that he and Valve split up on bad terms or that he's this depressed nihilist or anything. I'm just saying how I would feel under those circumstances. If I had written Epistle 3, that is what I would have meant by it. This is where we get to an interesting artistic crossroads. See, in my mind, even before rereading Epistle 3 and giving it all this thought, Half-Life has always been a series about human emotions existing and refusing to die out amidst a world that seemed like it only grew larger and more uncaring with each curve in the corridors. Ultimately, whether you want to say that this is what Half-Life is truly about or not, these are themes that Mark Laidlaw spent a lot of his career poking at and writing around. Naturally, these themes would extend into any story concept for Episode 3, but it's extremely fascinating to me that Epistle 3 comes across as being so personal to Mark Laidlaw. I guarantee that nobody at Valve ever discussed that ending with the beach. It looks to me like Mark Laidlaw spent 18 years writing about a world that doesn't care about the individual, only to discover that he'd been living in it this whole time. Half-Life has always been a series that asked one key question. What is the point of rebellion or survival or even humanity in a universe where nothing that we do will ever truly matter to more than a few hundred people? What's the point of being an individual? Well, if Alex Vance is where Half-Life gets its heart from, then she's also where we can find our answer. Ultimately, as is so often the case with this channel, there's little that I can do here but look to myself and bounce my own motivations off of Alex. Why do I do graffiti under bridges? Why did I transition? Why do I make these videos instead of doing clickbait? Why do I bother doing anything when I know that in 100 years nobody will remember any of it? So often, life is little more than pain, and yet we keep going. Why? What do humans have in them that makes truly giving up so uncommon? I've spent a few days now thinking about how best to end this video. How do I sum up my reason for existing, my reason for not just, kill binding, to use Source Engine terms, and then package them up in an Alex Vance-shaped box? While it seems like answers like hope or willpower fit the prompt well enough, they just don't feel complete with my interpretation of what Half-Life has been setting up all this time. Humanity didn't wipe the Combine off of Earth because of hope. They did it because of human ingenuity, that classic theme of Half-Life games that has been the driving force behind every single thing we do in the series. When it comes down to it, for me, the answer is simply boredom. And boredom is something that Alex Vance has in spades. If you'll allow me to get a little bit dark, I'm somebody who spent a lot of time struggling with suicidal thoughts, and the main reason I never went through with it is because I was terrified that being dead would be too boring. There are so many things that I've yet to experience. Ideas I've never considered, people I've never met, feelings I've never felt. Monotony is the most horrifying thing in the world to me, and monotony is exactly what the Combine represent, and what humans have spent about 300,000 years fighting against. We've traveled the world and settled new lands out of boredom. We've come up with countless inventions out of boredom. We've developed philosophies and religions and food and rituals and traditions, all to stave off boredom. Our boredom is what makes us so creative, and that's what separates us from the Combine. Coming back to Alex, she's a character who's absolutely fantastic about staving off boredom. Timing her trips from City 17 to Black Mesa East, jumping over rails rather than walking downstairs, messing around with the gravity gun, upgrading and modifying Dog just for the fun of it. I mean, hell, the first time we hear her voice, she's saying,
Ha! No, you don't!
This is the first time we see somebody actually having fun in the whole Half-Life series. And of course, it's Alex. She's the one who was bored enough to let herself have a little bit of fun in this dark, depressing world. And while Alex has a lot of great features, this is her strongest virtue in my mind, and it's why she's a good poster child for humanity in Half-Life 2. Ultimately, Half-Life 2 and everything else set in the Combine era represents humanity's own struggle against monotony. What's the point of rebelling in a world where you're so powerless? Why doesn't the whole species just give up like so many individuals within it have? It's because the human experience is just too wild, too subjective, too unpredictable for humans to ever decide as a species that it isn't worth exploring it further. No matter what you throw at them, from ecological disaster to alien dictatorship to portal storms, starvation, plague, whatever, there will always be a new frontier to explore. And as long as that's the case, humanity will always come back. Before I close out this week's video and get to work on the next one, I would just like to go ahead and verbally thank the patrons, especially those who are donating $10 or more monthly, such as I Don't Know, Fox Love and Honey, Tiggy, Ellie B, Marshall Nye, M. Coy, Rebecca F, Ayla Scott, Cappy, Lake, Mina, Batty Matty, Trash Can Teddy, Super, Eva Knight, Panda, Mr. Cococo, Shay Theus, Swatchbox, Nomad Delilah Jester, Cass, Stelly, Bjorb, Lily Leones, Neris, Olive Martini, Franz Johannes Fjellner, Sean Hamilton, Monkey Monk's Monkey Monastery, Haunted Mystic, Charlotte, Yas the Boss, Holly Schmidt, Freedom Rider, Evie, Rio, Laura M, Poof Donut, Femboy Fishing, Atheist, Joannis, IW, Arter Aurelia, Cornelius Nelson, Demise, Mia Maple, Nicole, Ada Avery, Neurofilter, The Coombe Slayer, Summer Celine Garnet Midnight, Jonah Shee, Dominic Johan, Big Time Jim, Dennis Voshakamer, Jake Everdeen, Almost Dead Again, Jonas, Gab, David Kaiser, Random Sageless, Erica, Darius Fazier, Maria, Alex Zinla, and CeeLo. I'd also just like to take a moment to sort of talk about my experiences making this video. I was very scared going into this whole 2 Half-Life videos thing, feeling that I was just going to feel like I was selling out, like I didn't really have anything super interesting to say about Half-Life anymore, and I was just making these videos because it's what, you know, the fans wanted or whatever. But by the time I got to the actual editing process for both of these, it occurred to me that I was really enjoying my time making these videos more than I have a lot of other things I've made recently. So I think just as a philosophy, I'm going to try to get the stick out of my ass with this stuff and stop taking myself so seriously and just making videos that I think I'll have fun making instead of trying to like change people's lives every week or whatever, because that's just not sustainable. I don't have that many great video ideas that I can just do that constantly. I just want to make videos that I enjoy making, and that's what these 2 were, so I hope y'all enjoyed them too.